Hello, everyone, and welcome to the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Valls, and for this show, I'm going to be joined by Joe Mead. We're going to focus on some of the major sports in the Big Ten Conference. And like our other shows, this is presented by the Sports Daily Media Network. So, Joe, why don't you tell us a little bit about what this show is going to be about?
Yeah, me and Sean, I don't like going into our personal lives too much, but we met in high school, and Sean was a rabid Indiana basketball fan, and I was a rabid Michigan football and basketball fan. And what we always found interesting was I would never have fun trolling Sean or anyone else who cared about particularly college basketball when it came to Michigan football beating Indiana or any other school besides Ohio State because they frankly didn't care. And I don't think it was just a matter of not caring. They just didn't either have the time or they felt they were so behind in the sport that, getting into it would seem phony or fake. But, getting into the sport is a lot. And I think the biggest thing this podcast does is it's a podcast for everyone. It's a podcast for people who watch both sports, for people who casually watch both sports, or for people who maybe they're rabid Indiana basketball or Purdue basketball fans and they want to learn more about Big Ten football. Maybe it's because they believe in their team this year. Maybe it's because they want to chill with their buddies. And the same goes for vice versa. Let's say you're a rabid Ohio State football fan that doesn't really know too much about college basketball. This is really your podcast. So if you're having a discussion at the bar, work, restaurant, subway, whatever, you could be in tune of what's going on. And so, in a nutshell, really means we're going to fill you in on everything you need to know, not the minute, boring details. And, we're not going to spend each week and waste your time in the offseason talking about press conferences and quotes and hot mics. There are plenty of other podcasts I can refer you to that do that. But, with that said, Sean, anything else you want to add?
And just we're going to kind of go over where each fan base is at, and that fan base might be in a good spot football wise and a bad spot basketball wise or something like that. Very few of the teams I think are looking at, kind of being like a national championship contender in both sports, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. One of the biggest topics in the entire sports world, not just our conference, Joe, is realignment, and that has affected um, our conference like it did, 8, 10 years ago. It's pretty certain now that Oregon and Washington are coming to the Big Ten. So coast to coast conference that'll bring up the amount of members to 16 teams. What are your initial thoughts on something like this?
Yeah, I think it's definitely interesting. And the reason I don't sound so enthused is I'm not. I was always a guy who was big on regional geography and, uh, this is a exercise for our viewers, maybe 16 or younger. Look up what conferences looked like in 2007. I think you'll be amazed. Maybe you've seen the graphics. It's been all over Instagram, Twitter, or whatever social media you guys are on, and it's kind of insane. It's gotten to this point, but in terms of this started off as a basketball show. We're going into football. Football is one game a week. Basketball, it's going to be really interesting to see how this shakes out. We have a 20 game conference schedule now in the Big Ten. And, what's that going to look like with 18 teams? You have a 9 game football schedule in conference. What's that going to look like with 18 teams? There's been talk of moving to 10 for basketball, 22, 24. I'm not going to keep going on speculation because I can't guess what the decision makers don't even know, right? So I will say it's a big win for Tony Petitti, the new Big Ten commissioner. A quick recap for everyone. Jim Delaney stepped down around 2018, 2019, and Kevin Warren stepped in. Very infamous for stopping the 2020 football season. Our previous viewers and Big Ten football fans everywhere certainly have their feelings toward him in a negative light because of that. And, I would say the highlight of his tenure, Sean, was just adding USC and UCLA. Sean, as a basketball guy, what else did Kevin Warren really do for the conference in his, I'd say short and unceremonious tenure?
Well, he got a better job out of it. Um, so you could look at it that way, but yeah, so UCLA and USC are going to be joining the conference next academic year. So not this year, but the next one. And then the two new Pac-12 teams will bring up the total to 18, actually. So, like you said, Joe, you've got your rivalries, and this is more so in football than it is in basketball, but you got your rivalries, and in football, you're going to play them every year. So that leaves like you're going to see the other teams like once every 3 years. That's really what it's going to come down to. And maybe, we've seen the implementation of divisions in football for quite a while now. I think that argument's going to come up in basketball because, it's a long way from New Jersey to LA or College Park to Spokane, so or wherever University of Washington is. But the travel is going to be bad. I know Indiana fans and the players kind of get mad when they have to go to Iowa or Minnesota or Maryland or something like that. It's like going to be a quarter of some of the trips that some teams are going to have to do. But everybody kind of lost their minds when this kind of happened last time, decade ago, roughly, and seemed to work out okay. So, you're not going to see the teams as much. I think the 2 times a year rivalries are probably over in basketball unless you meet in the Big Ten tournament or something like that. Brings in more locations for Big Ten title game in football, Big Ten tournament in basketball. We've seen Indy for football mostly, right? And then Indy, Chicago, DC, and New York, mostly the first 2 that I said for basketball. So, that brings Vegas into play, all the California towns for at least 1 year. But, it's a true nationwide conference now. The Washington and Oregon news was like last week. USC and UCLA have been
12, 13 months.
Yeah, about a year now. So, it's going to change a lot. I think the LA aspect does help a lot for recruits nationwide. You get eyes on those California kids, and they're watching Big Ten sports because it's right there. And I think that's going to be a good thing for recruiting. But those athletic department expenses are going to go up when you got to go on a 6-7 hour flight across the country. But it's an interesting time to be in the Big Ten as fans of 2 of the longer standing members here.
Yeah, and one last thing I would add from my end, Sean, is 2 of the biggest, I'd say one of the biggest podcast hosts in college football is Josh Pate, Late Kick Cut 247. Very much moderate, and if you want to put this in a political sense, very moderate when it comes to, he doesn't really rip teams, doesn't rip decisions, but he is very unspoken about the fact that if something, just because you change something doesn't mean it needs to get changed, meaning this whole alignment thing. And ultimately, he's like all of us. We don't know how it's going to work out. Sean brought up a point about how when Rutgers and Maryland joined, everyone freaked out and said the Big Ten would look unworthy. Fast forward now, the Big Ten is in a cold war with the SEC, it seems like, just to add teams. And then speaking of the SEC, I know some of our Big Ten loyalists are going to get really mad. Eli Drinkowitz, head football coach of Missouri, shined a light on what's like for the lesser sports, right? I don't mean lesser in terms of, those athletes work their butt off too, but
the ones that don't get as many eyes.
Yeah, the softballs, the golfs, the gymnastics, the swimming, the Olympic sports, right? It's going to affect their travel too. And, there's a lot of viewpoints to consider. And, that's what we've done this off season. And frankly, me and Sean wanted to touch on this just to give our takes on it. But, we leave this up to the viewer. We don't want our opinion be your opinion. And, I think our viewers are smart enough to make up their own decision for themselves. I'm not going to be Paul Feinbaum. I'm not going to be a guy going on ESPN and Fox and demanding this or that. Those are just for viewers and clicks. And here you're going to get our honest opinion. And, that's why we hope you listen to us, and you hope you enjoy, but we also hope you do disagree and send us DMs when we are proven wrong. So
Yeah. A lot of people have kind of like asked me what I thought about really specifically Oregon and Washington, but kind of realignment as a whole. Like I don't really have an opinion yet. I mean, we're not really going to know until what 5, 6 years down the road. Like you said, Rutgers and Maryland. I don't know if Rutgers is really caught up on the football side, but the basketball side they have. They're like one of the teams that you think of like as a Big Ten team. Fouls you a lot, plays tough, maybe gets beat by faster guards. That's Rutgers. So took them a little bit and a new coach, but they're fully ingrained, play the same style as the rest of the Big Ten. So it'll happen eventually. The West Coast is really far away, but it opens a lot of opportunities for some better players to come in the conference, not just in the big sports too, because you see kind of, especially football, basketball, even baseball, recruiting's kind of nationwide. But for those sports that you mentioned earlier, I don't know a whole lot of swimmers, for example, that will go to a school across the country. If they're from California, they're going to USC. Well, Big Ten. I think the quality of the conference will probably go up over time, but there will be people who are mad. So, before we'll go individually into this per team over the next couple weeks before the football season kicks off. But Joe, just tell us a couple things that happened in the off season for the Big Ten teams in college football.
yeah, and as Sean said, we're going to touch on, I'm going to do a real Big Ten offseason, and nice voice crack by me there. In a nutshell, in terms of, timeline and stuff, if you've seen those, maybe insert TV show season 1 in, maybe 5 minutes, or, this one, if you're a real nut job, Marvel Cinematic Universe in blah, blah, blah minutes. I don't know how you can explain something like that. That's been around that long in a certain amount of minutes. But with this football offseason, we certainly will in a future episode coming up very shortly. But, let's talk about the biggest thing, Sean. And, here's where I turn it to you. And this isn't to put pressure on at all. As a basketball guy, what are the biggest things you've seen this offseason that, just a headline reader, like what's your take on some
for football or basketball?
Football.
I think that your guys in maize and blue are probably the favorites from what I'm hearing. And Coach Harbaugh, no suspension anymore. I'm sure you're pretty happy about that. What he did was like nothing compared to what some of the other coaches got away with. But your guys are probably the favorites to get out of this conference. And if it's not you, then who else is it?
Yeah, Sean, it's Michigan. It's a great time to be a Wolverine, 2-time defending Big Ten champions. But the AP poll was released today. To no one's surprise, the 2-time defending national champion Georgia was number 1, Michigan 2. But right in at number 3 was the Ohio State Buckeyes. And for all the flack they got this offseason, I'll be the first Michigan fan to admit this. They were 1 field goal away from trouncing TCU in the national title game, and I could have that argument with anyone on earth, and I don't think I would ever think I would lose that argument because Ohio State is loaded with talent. Ryan Day, look at what they do, even in the 2024 recruiting class, coming off 2 losses to Michigan in 2 non-Big Ten title years, which almost seems blasphemous. Columbus, still killing it, still a heck of a lot of talent. Yes, the biggest thing you've read all offseason is, can Ohio State replace CJ Stroud? Well, let me put it to you like this. Ryan Day's been at Ohio State since 2017, whether as an offensive coordinator or a head coach. Each of those years, starting quarterback has been a first-round draft pick. Dwayne Haskins, Justin Fields, and CJ Stroud being the latest. Yes, maybe he struggled with the Texans in the preseason, but, this is a college podcast. I leave that to our NFL and pro guys to analyze that. Kyle McCord or Devin Brown, 2 guys that bring very different things to the table. Kyle McCord, he's been in some games, albeit at mop-up duty or against Akron in week 3, where there were 40,000 Ohio State fans the whole game. he's a guy, 5-star recruit, played with Marvin Harrison Jr. in high school. You know, some guys make the argument that's why you were a 5-star. How hard could it be? You know, being shocked and throw to Marvin Harrison Jr. But nonetheless, Ryan Day, to develop quarterbacks, that's what he's known for. That's why he's there. And their passing game has always been ranked top 2 or 3 in the whole country. And I see no reason why that can't happen again. And certainly right on Michigan's coattails. And, you know, the next team I'm going to say is another team that's been, you know, and for the Penn State fans, I'm going to give you an analogy. Think about when Michigan was hyped up in 2019. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but the amount of hype around Penn State is very exciting for them. This is probably on paper. It's been under Franklin. I'll slightly disagree with that, Sean, because I think their 2016 and 17 teams with Saquon Barkley, Trace McSorley were, I'd say, a little better. But, you know, in terms of narrative, for Ohio State and Penn State, here's what they have to answer. Ohio State, and Sean, just chime in real quick. How unusual is it to hear is Ohio State has a Michigan problem? Can they get over the hump? Doesn't that sound awfully familiar?
It does. Yeah. It was the other way quite a while the other way. But how likely do you think it is that we see another scenario where whoever wins that game the last week of the season, or let me put that a different way. It doesn't matter who wins that last week of the season because both teams are going to be in the college football playoff anyway. Is there a way that not even because they can't both go to the Big Ten championship game because they're in the same division. So we're assuming that the winner of that will also knock off whoever they face next. But controversially, Ohio State, you know, they had some help. Other teams lost, but is there a way that the loser of that game gets in?
Well, Sean, I think your question brings up another question too, but I'll answer yours first. I think it's very possible. I think both teams. Ohio State has a very strong strength of schedule. They play at Notre Dame, another top 15 team on the road, and certainly probably by then a top 10 team on the road. They play at Wisconsin, who, you know, by looks of it, could be a top 20, 25 team. And then they also play Penn State at home, who's ranked number 7 in the AP poll as of today, and then going to Michigan. What I've said there is 4 top 15 to 20 opponents, 3 of which are on the road, Sean. You know, you go 3-1 in those games and win all the ones you're going to be favored by more than 20 in Vegas. And, you know, it's going to be hard to make an argument that you couldn't. And, you know, the same goes for Michigan. You know, and the reason I say Michigan is different because Ohio State last year, everyone makes a big case. And again, they made the playoff. They were one of the 4 best teams. I'm going to be very clear. I don't want anyone misinterpreting what I'm saying. But Ohio State only ended the year, Sean, with 1 top 10 win. And that was at Penn State on Halloween weekend, week 9 of the season. And the reason I bring that up is Michigan's strength of schedule this year is kind of on par. It's, you know, everyone's going to bring up the win against Notre Dame. Notre Dame was ranked 5th the week 1, but Notre Dame finished the year 8-4, Sean. People forget they lost to Marshall and Stanford, who didn't beat another FBS opponent that year. Power 5 opponent. So, you know, with that said, Michigan at 11-1 with a loss at home to Ohio State would have as strong a case as Ohio State did last year, who got in. And the second question you bring up, Sean, is it going to come down to that game? And call me a homer, but I'm going to explain why. Because everyone's going to bring up the elephant in the room, Sean, who I just brought up, and that's Penn State. Penn State has always been, you know, in the past 2 or 3 seasons, second fiddle to Michigan, Ohio State. And that's not said insultingly. That's just said as a matter of the standings. Here's the story on James Franklin. We brought up the Ohio State narrative. Here's the Penn State narrative. They have to win one of those games. And the thing I will give James Franklin is he wins a lot of games he should win, but this is the year he has to get back to that 2016 where he wins games he should win. Since then, you know, Sean, the biggest wins they've had have been at night in the whiteouts, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's an amazing environment. But Penn State fans, the biggest thing they brought up this offseason is the fact the Michigan game at home is noon in week 11. And the biggest thing I would tell Penn State fans is this is the year you got to win a big game on the road or at night. which Penn State, that's what separates them from being a great program. And this is a James Franklin quote, and an elite program. And they have two chances to do it this year. They play at Ohio State October 21st, and they have by Wolverines at home November 11th at noon. Both those could prove a lot of people wrong. A lot of questions for Drew Aller. Certainly don't lack talent on either of the lines or on the defense. But, there's two giants in the Big Ten, and Penn State has to slay at least one and not trip up along the way. Those are the biggest knocks on Franklin, and he has the opportunity to address that. Sean, I'm going to take a dig at you now, and I think it's only fair if I take a dig at some other fan base now too. Do you recall 2020's football season well?
I know that Indiana actually fielded a competitive team that year, and was pretty close to the Big Ten championship, and if I'm not mistaken. But yeah.
Yes, absolutely on part. And team that made it to the Big Ten championship game, Sean, was Northwestern. And the biggest, and I maybe call it irony, maybe some people find humor, maybe some people will use this as the ultimate argument as to why 2020 may have been an illegitimate season, was Tom Allen and Pat Fitzgerald were the media darlings of the world, while Jim Harbaugh, it seemed like, was getting peppered on from each end. Couldn't coach. People wanted him fired. People were pretty much, writing the ending of his tenure at Michigan. And the reason I bring that up, Sean, is Indiana football. I can't think of a coach who has a hotter seat right now than Tom Allen. Following 2020, people forget Indiana was ranked in top 15 of a lot of polls, AP, and if the CFP came out of week 1 in 2021, I think Indiana would have been top 15. And they had all the hype all year, and immediately Iowa just clobbered them week 1. And ever since then, Indiana has not been the same program, going 2-10 in 2021. Not much better last year. And, Tom Allen, I will say, he has to field a competitive team, whether that's make a bowl game, go 5-7, and beat someone besides a non-bowling Michigan State team. That's the guy with the hottest seat in the conference. And another guy who we thought would have the hottest seat in the conference, we're going to switch divisions real quick, but then we'll go right back to the East, is Pat Fitzgerald. What a fall from grace, man. I'm not going to comment on the allegations or what's gone on. People could read their own reports and make their own assumptions. But Sean, isn't it crazy to think that Pat Fitzgerald got fired before Chris Collins did at Northwestern, taking big picture into account? Think about that statement.
Yeah, Northwestern's made multiple Big Ten championships, and you can say that it's easier to do it over there in the West, but you can't do better than winning the West. So, it's a tough situation. Usually there's some truth to whatever comes out, but that Northwestern hoops season is the only thing keeping that athletic program together, I think, at this point. Collins was gone last year. I think they just didn't want to fire him and give him whatever he wanted. And he ended up making the tournament, so they had to keep him around. But it seems pretty messy over there in Illinois.
Yeah, Sean, and let's just transition back to the East real quick. Another guy, local media, I work in Detroit now. Maybe they want to warm up this guy's seat more than they should. It's the 2021 Big Ten Coach of the Year, Mel Tucker. Another fall from grace as in last year. Definitely not to the level of maybe a Tom Allen or a Pat Fitzgerald, but Sean, going 11-2
another really bad season would at least bring the conversation.
And maybe some people who are big Michigan State, I'd say doubters, haters, whatever you want to call it, maybe they're making a seat warmer because they feel their schedule this year is too much for them to handle. And the reason I say too much for them to handle is it's not a matter of them just being bad. It's a matter that they play 4 top 10 teams this whole year, Sean. They play Washington in week 3. In the middle of October, they play Michigan. And then 2 of their last 3 games are against Ohio State, who's 56-7 them and scored nearly 50 on them the next year. And then they don't even have Penn State at home anymore. They have them at a neutral site game at Ford Field to end the regular season. So, Sean, some people chalked it up as 4 losses right there. And, the biggest thing for Michigan State this year is they have to get momentum back. And what's that look like record wise? Really, who knows? Because Michigan State beating Michigan or beating, Michigan State in the mid 2010s made their identity on being down and winning. That was their whole mantra, their playoff team in 2015, when they went to the Horseshoe and upset Columbus without Connor Cook. And, hopefully for them, they get that mantra back because, right now, a lot of whispers around the program. When you lose your starting quarterback, clearly had the job, and your best offensive weapon in Keon Coleman right after spring ball, not only does it make your own fan base question what's going on, it makes chatter around your program not so great from everyone else around the country. So, big question for Michigan State this year is, can you get momentum back, and what's that look like? And, we're certainly going to find that out. And let's just wrap up the East real quick, Sean. Maryland football, the story on them has kind of been, and I'll compare them maybe even to Maryland basketball, a program that's good. They make bowl games. Mike Locksley, like their old basketball coach Mark Turgeon, definitely improved the program, but they could never really seem to take the next step. And to be very fair to Maryland football, taking the next step in the Big Ten East, where one could make an argument that where 2 of the top 5 programs in the country reside, is a lot tougher than elevating Maryland basketball, who has a storied history and who won a basketball national championship this decade, this century. Not a lot of Big Ten teams could say that.
No Big Ten team has.
Nope, no Big Ten team has.
They were in the Atlantic Coastal Conference when they did it, but they're technically the last Big Ten team to win. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, with all that said, Sean, Josh Gattis, the old Michigan offensive coordinator from 2021, Broyles Award winner, got a lot of flack last year at Miami for being responsible for some part of their offense last year. Make your own conclusions. Miami went 5-7 with a very talented offense. But he's back with Mike Locksley. They worked together in Alabama in 2018. I find that very interesting because the two had major beef in 2019 about who called that offense. Another one of those off-season stories that's more worth examining on a daily podcast, maybe Menace 2 Sports or a local Alabama, Michigan, Maryland podcast. With all that said, Sean, can they take the next step? And for them, the next step is they got to beat one of these big 3 teams. They've beaten Penn State and Michigan in the past, but both those teams they've beaten have been teams that finished with 5 or more losses from Michigan or Penn State. So, Maryland, they have the talent. They have Talia Tagovailoa. They have great offensive minds with Locksley and Gattis. Can they finish against one of these big 3 teams? And, going bowling for them is always good, but, this is about elevating the program, taking the next step. They've invested a lot in their program, a lot of Under Armour money too. So we'll see. And we'll end it, Sean, with our hometown boys, Rutgers. Greg Schiano, fan favorite at New Jersey. Can't think of a real New Jersey person that doesn't love Greg and doing the chop. But, they have the work cut out for them. What can I say? They bring back Gavin Wimsatt, kind of making him the guy. Was shaky last year, turned the ball over way too much, had more interceptions than touchdowns. But, Rutgers, their biggest goal is to make a bowl, man. Simple as that. They play relatively manageable non-conference, but then to make a bowl game, they got to pick off a game they shouldn't. I'm not going to tell you that's going to be against Michigan, Penn State, or Ohio State, but maybe you pick off Michigan State at home. You pick off Maryland at home. You do one of those things, and maybe it gets the program going again. Coach Schiano, they did go bowling in 21, but definitely not in the hot seat by any means. But a fan base, this is year 4 for Greg. Fan base that does want to see some results at some point.
He had multiple top 25 teams in his first tenure there at Rutgers, but he hasn't really got it going again since he came back from the Buccaneers. But yeah, he Yeah, I almost kind of forgot that he was their coach, to be honest. They need to do something this year. And getting to a bowl seems like a good solid goal for them.
Absolutely. And Sean, I'm gonna not really speed through the Big Ten West out of disrespect, but the Big Ten West is probably the most, we all read that book in growing up in high school or in middle school where, you learn that the world is gray. It's not that black and white. And the West is really pretty mysterious division. The favorites are Iowa, Wisconsin, but those are two teams with a lot of new faces. Wisconsin probably won the coaching cycle this year, not as chaotic as the 21-22 offseason, but, getting Luke Fickell, Ohio State guy, grew up in Columbus, was at Cincinnati. Everyone thought he was taking the Notre Dame job in 21. And I have a lot of good reason to believe he had an offer, or if he really wanted to, he could have went for it, but he didn't. He stayed at UC, and everyone thought he'd follow either his buddy Mike Vrabel to the NFL or just wait until that Ohio State job came open. So it was a really shock to everyone, including the Wisconsin fan base when he jumped ship and went to Wisconsin. And the biggest shock, I think, is a program known for running the ball and playing scrappy and playing good trench play. They hired Joe Longo, the UNC offensive coordinator, to run an air raid offense. Sean, in all your years, I'd say observing Big Ten football, do you remember Wisconsin being a team that ever was an air raid or a non-run the ball team?
No, if you think about their players who have, worth remembering and then have done something in the NFL, those are all running backs. And, Russell Wilson was the quarterback there a while ago, but no, not at all. They've seemed to build an identity on running the ball. But maybe they're switching things up, or they're definitely switching things up.
Yeah, then we'll go to our next team, the Iowa Hawkeyes. Kirk Ferentz is definitely not a new face. He's the longest tenured coach of the Big Ten. And it seems like, Sean, he's been there longer than most of our viewers have probably been alive. So crazy thing to think about. But the thing that seems longer than anything for them is their offense. The victim of many college football meme accounts last season. I can't think of a program that got more flack this offseason from the contract for their offensive coordinator, who is Kirk Ferentz's son, Brian Ferentz, that scored 25 half points a game, the offense, for him to keep his job for next season. I've never seen a contract structured that way, let alone be leaked to the public that way. In all of my sporting experience, I have never once seen that. But they definitely have some new weapons. They have Cade McNamara. Yes, that Cade McNamara from the 2021 Michigan Football Big Ten Championship team. They have Eric All, too, another one from the 2021 Michigan Football Big Ten Championship team. Maybe there was a lot of drama when he left Michigan, but I think he's ready to put that behind him, and I think he's going to remind the world what he's about. And probably their biggest acquisition this offseason, Sean, that no one talks about is the addition of Caleb Brown, 5-star receiver from Ohio State, going to Iowa. I'm not saying that means it definitely works out, but if you paid any attention to the headlines, those three names came up at some point. And now it's up to Brian Ferentz, Cade, Eric, and Caleb to put something together. Plenty of weapons there. Definitely never a lack of passion from the Hawkeye fan base, but a lot of unknowns. And, Sean, I'm going to speed through the other five so we get to basketball. Nebraska, another new face, Matt Rule, coming from the Panthers. He really rebuilt Baylor, and I'm sure Mike Kumar is listening somewhere with his fist up. I'm going to call out Mike here, even though he is busy and doing a noble deed, as we all know. Baylor went 1-11 his first year, and he interviewed with an NFL team. I remember Mike putting on a Snapchat story. This man goes 1-11. He's interviewing with NFL teams. But after that, it was nothing but success from him at Baylor, similar to what he did at Temple. NFL, again, very few college guys do well there. So, year one at Nebraska. Sean, I'm going to read off a stat for you. Nebraska has had a losing record since they've joined the Big Ten in football. Could you imagine
It certainly seems like it. I mean, that they've been around for a little bit, right? It's got to be what, 15 years now in the Big Ten?
Uh, this will be their 14th.
Okay, so yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of losing seasons. They've got some big coaching hires, but Rule obviously did he do it long enough at Baylor? I think he was a pretty quick hook from Baylor, or rather the Panthers from Baylor. Um, obviously it didn't work out there, but they always seem to be able to attract big names for their football program, despite really having kind of any success in the conference. But
Yeah, Sean. And for Nebraska fans, again, like Iowa, extremely passionate and also extremely friendly. I will throw that in. Some of the nicest people you will meet. That's a fan base that really need success. Imagine if Jim Harbaugh went 4 seasons without winning, going to a bowl game at the University of Michigan. That's what us going like, and not even 4. No, 4 and like let's call it 2 games. That's what it was like for Scott Frost. And again, that fan base needs something to cheer for. Their basketball program, we'll get into later, hasn't done that too much of late, besides a few surprises last year. So we're going to round this out with Illinois, Purdue, and let's start with Purdue. Purdue football, Ryan Walters, new coach, Illinois DC, Jeff Brom jumping ship, no O'Connell, no Chucky Jones. I'd say this is a rebuilding year, Sean, and a team that's going to have a defensive identity instead of an offensive identity is, something I'm not going to comment too much on. It's one of the more wild card teams, maybe even more so than Iowa, because we don't know what they have. They have Hudson Card, transfer from Texas. And, he has a lot to prove, and so does that new coaching staff. So we'll just buckle up and see it. We'll go more into them later. Rounding it out, Illinois, Brett Bielema, 3rd season, old Wisconsin coach. And Sean, people don't know this. Brett Bielema, he's won a lot of Big Ten titles. And did so at Wisconsin. And he's been around a while, man. He was coaching when we were barely old enough to walk. Certainly had his ups and downs with Arkansas, going back to the pros as an assistant, but he's rehabbed his image so far. Illinois always performed above expectations. Really didn't have the greatest quarterback play from Tommy DeVito, who's playing for the Giants in the preseason now. But Luke Altmaier, Lane Kiffin, trained at Ole Miss for a while, was the backup. Certainly has a lot of talent. And again, like Purdue, another guy with something to prove, and maybe he could do so in the Big Ten West. And last team in the Big Ten West we got to talk about, it's not going to be Northwestern. We already touched on them. And frankly, I don't want to talk about a team that didn't win a game on this continent last year. And, Sean, anything else I'm leaving out for any of the Big Ten West teams, or is it just the same old, same old? We don't know who's going to win.
If you had to pick one team that's not Penn State, Michigan, or Ohio State to be like a sleeper, I guess, or a top 20 team, like you don't have to go into much detail, but which one would you pick?
I'm going to pick 2 teams, and they're going to be from the West. The reason I was leaving this team for last is Minnesota. There is no other reason why I'm picking Minnesota besides their offensive line play and their ability to run. No Mo Ibrahim, but they do avoid. They only play Michigan this year. And the biggest thing you see in the West, Sean, is every team that's won the West has avoided 2 of the 3, whether that's been Michigan, Penn State, or Ohio State. They only have to play Michigan. No Penn State, no Ohio State. So Minnesota, maybe by principle of that, could surprise a lot of people and maybe make it to the Big Ten title game. One of the few West teams that haven't been yet. Them, Illinois, and Nebraska made it in the Leaders Legends, but they haven't made it as a member of the East or West. And then the second one I'm going to throw in, Sean, is Iowa. Because if that can click, Bill Parker is one of the best defensive coordinators in the country. They're always going to have a great defense. And if they can couple that with a good, not even great, a good offense, They could surprise a lot of people. And I'm going to pencil in right now, Sean. My earliest prediction, and this is subject to change, is Michigan and Iowa, Cade versus JJ, the ultimate mano a mano. Maybe for our older viewers, that's essentially could be Drew Henson versus Tom Brady college edition, of course. The battle we never got to see. So, yeah, Sean, that pretty much ends up the football questions and narratives. Let's head back to what started the show. Let's talk about basketball.
So when you're looking at the 23-24 season for hoops, there's really only one way to start, and that's with the 7-4 behemoth from Purdue. Zach Edey's back for another year. It's the second straight year that the National Player of the Year is returning. That was Oscar Tshiebwe last year at Kentucky. Last year didn't go too great for him, but really nowhere else to start from there, Joe. But he has got to be – he's just probably got to have an okay season to get the award again, especially with pretty much everybody's clear second pick, Trace Jackson Davis from Indiana, now a member of the Golden State Warriors. What do you think about Edey? And for me, at least, I'd be shocked if he doesn't get it. He's got to get injured or something's got to go really wrong.
I think, Sean, what it's understood maybe doesn't need to be reiterated. One thing I will say for Edey and legacy at Purdue is they and Purdue fans are going to strangle me through their podcast. He's got to be known as a winner at Purdue. They've won the Big Ten tournament. They've won the Big Ten title. And look at any Purdue fan page or any Purdue blog. Nobody cares. They need to get it done in March. They need to not even go to the Final Four. They need to have some success. That fan base is dying for success in March. And that's what Edey is ultimately going to be judged on. Not 2 National Player of the Year awards. March success. Is that correct, Sean?
I mean, they've lost now 3 years in a row to double-digit seeds in the first round. I would say even just like a Sweet 16 appearance and a protected seed would be a good season or a good solid season for Purdue at this point. So that's 1 through 4 seed or and a second weekend appearance. In terms of their other players, their team is very similar from last year. They lost David Jenkins, who graduated, and they replaced him with Southern Illinois transfer Lance Jones. Jones is a guard, 6'1", not really a three-point shooter. It says only 32%. But the rest of their team, Lawyer, Smith, they're not freshmen anymore. They're a year older. Still got Morton, First, Gillis, that sort of core. So it seems like very likely that they're going to be up at the top of the Big Ten. Unless something changes, that maybe a major injury to Edey or something, but they're probably going to be their first or second in the Big Ten. And the second team is making sort of a lot of headlines that kind of got snatched away by Edey, but it's Tom Izzo's Michigan State Spartans. They're ranked 8th here in the Bart Torvik rankings for next year. They seem to have really upgraded their roster. I think they bring back kind of what I would say is their most talented 3 players from last year: Tyson Walker, AJ Hogard, and Malik Hall. And then, of course, they bring in 3 freshmen that are very, very highly rated: Xavier Booker, Jeremy Fears, and Cohen Carr. I think that there's a very good chance that if Purdue doesn't win the title, it's going to be Michigan State, and maybe a 2 to 5% chance that it's somebody else. But Michigan State's in for a real good season, I think. And, Izzo obviously can coach. They may not take the lumps early that they usually do with some of their younger teams, but, there's a real good chance that Michigan State could be a Final Four quality team this year.
Yeah, Sean, this is probably, and this couples into what our football conversation a little. This is probably the most hyped a Michigan State basketball team has been since, maybe 2015-16, the year they had Denzel Valentine, and I'm not going to bring up what happened in that fateful game against Middle Tennessee State. But in terms of hype, man, recruiting-wise, returning players, Jaden Akins coming back too. They have so many returning guys. It's hard to even keep track.
Really, just Hauser that's gone. Really,
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Not saying Hauser's an insignificant loss, but compared to other losses in the conference, they really seem to reload. Still the favorite, probably, but is Michigan State more of a favorite to go the Final Four than Purdue? I think very few people would disagree with that statement. So certainly an exciting time to be a Michigan State basketball fan. I do disagree that I think they're going to take some lumps at the beginning of the year. Maybe that's more of a victim of it's college basketball
They always schedule
versus,
hard, but
and they do schedule very
yeah.
hard. Yes. Yes. So again, great time to be a Michigan State basketball fan. And, that's certainly going to be a fun team to cover as we get on later into this year. Sean, take it away for the next team.
So according to Bart Torvik, which is, it's based on preseason and, take it what you will, but there's a big drop off here for Michigan State at 8th to the third Big Ten team, which is Illinois at 29. And then there's a bunch kind of in the, that range. They got Quincy Guerrier from Oregon. But other than that, they just kind of return Shannon and Hawkins. Hawkins, has been labeled a directional school merchant. Can't really do it against the big teams, but he's back with Shannon. Dange is back too. Luke Goody, Sincere Harris. So they return like a good solid core of their team. From a team last year, maybe that's not such a good thing because last year they were probably one of the biggest disappointments in the country in terms of just a total inconsistency. Matthew Meyer is gone, according to this roster. There, he is gone. But Illinois fans were happy when the season ended last year. That much talent, got a 9 seed. Not a whole lot of additions. Did get Justin Harmon from Utah Valley, who averaged just over 10 points a game, but there is only so much that a new player can do in the Big Ten. Obviously, there's a couple of exceptions, but this seems like a very similar roster to last year, and I hope they did some sort of team building activities because their chemistry was horrendous last year at times, and they had some halves where they lost a half by 20, but Illinois, I don't really see much different from last year. Maybe a little better. Maybe they are a top 25 team, but I just think the inconsistency will still be there.
Yeah, Sean, I'll wrap this up saying maybe it's a little different than Purdue because they haven't had quite the talent and hype that they've had. But actually, I take that back. Illinois has had good regular seasons. Let's take out last year. And not made it to the Sweet 16 since 2005. It's a fact that's going to be constantly brought up, not only by people on this podcast, people who watch this podcast, but by analysts everywhere. And the one way Underwood could get the momentum he had from 2019 to really 2021, those 3 years, man, Illinois was probably one of the hottest programs, not only in the Midwest, but the whole country. He's got to address that. They've got to get better. There just needs to be better vibes around that program. And Sean hit it on the head. There is not great vibes around the program right now. So up to him to get it back in gear.
So in the very next spot, 30th, it's my Indiana Hoosiers. A little bit of turnover. Trace is gone. Race is gone. Miller Kopp is gone. Jalen Hood-Schifino is gone. But Mike Woodson did a ton of work in the transfer portal, bringing in Kellel Ware from Oregon, Peyton Sparks from Ball State, and then getting Mackenzie Mbako after he declined to sign his NLI at Duke. So I think the talent is definitely there, Joe, for IU to be as good as last year, which was a protected seed in the NCAA tournament, which is a total win, really, for any team not named Kentucky or Duke every year. But a couple of question marks where do all these players kind of fit, because there's a lot of talent in the front court and really only Xavier Johnson in the back court. But Indiana has a pretty decent schedule this year. Forgetting what it's called, the game in Indy against the other Indiana
Crossroads.
schools. Crossroads. No Crossroads
Yep.
this year. and no Big Ten ACC Challenge this year. So a little bit of a different schedule that way. They just found out today, actually, they play UConn in the Empire City Classic in November. It's a 4-teamer, and then they'll play the winner of Texas and Louisville, or loser, the next day. So they found ways. They play Auburn. They still found ways to get a real good schedule of the non-conference, which can definitely carry you if you do kind of go 9-11 or 10-10 in the Big Ten to a top 7 or so seed. So you might see them kind of figure it out over the first couple months, who plays where, what their best lineup is. But I think there's a real chance that this could end in a second weekend for the Hoosiers this year.
Yeah, and that's going to be the goal, and that should be the goal. It's Indiana basketball, the biggest brand in the Big Ten in basketball. So, they have high standards. They should have high standards. And, Sean, it's time they meet high standards.
Yep. Been a couple years in a row. After 4 or 5 years without an NCAA tournament, been 2 years in a row in the NCAA tournament, 2 years in a row where you won a game. Now it's time to get to the Sweet 16 or longer. And, everybody talks about matchups in the NCAA tournament. They got a tough matchup with Miami, but if you're there every year, you'll get a good run of matchups one of the years. So, sometimes you get beat and upset maybe a couple of years in a row by teams that you're better than. But if you're there every year, that's a sign of a good program. And hopefully, this year doesn't go badly. Third year in a row of the NCAA tournament. Seems like Indiana will hopefully solidify themselves at the top, or at least top half of the conference every year, because there was a while there, even in some of the years where they made the NCAA tournament, where they were not in the top half. Obviously, they got the double bye this year. And if you do find yourself in the double bye, you're played in the NCAA tournament. But it's just so much easier to make a run in the Big Ten tournament when you're not in that stupid 8-9 game on Thursday.
At noon or 11:30.
Or 11:30, since Fox took over the tournament. But
Yep.
yeah, so the next team, Joe, is a team that's, I think, gone under the radar a little bit. And that's Wisconsin. Greg Gard's still in town. They returned most of their roster from an MIT team last year. Tyler Wall is back. He was dealing with injuries last year. Connor Esigian sticks around. Stephen Crouch, Chucky Hepburn. I think there's a chance that these Wisconsin Badgers can kind of go under the radar, maybe get like a 7 seed, 8 seed in the NCAA tournament, and just have another solid Wisconsin season. They've, last year they just missed out, but they still had that Wisconsin defense last year. They just couldn't make any shots, and their best player goes down and isn't really the same when he goes back. But I do think last year was more of a blip in the radar for Wisconsin hoops, and they should be back in the big dance this year.
Yeah, Sean, and the biggest question is like you said, they have to score, and they have to score off the bench. That's the biggest thing. They haven't done that, and there'd be games where Jordan Davis would have to come off the bench, and if he scored over 6, they were in good shape. If they didn't, they would get absolutely like 1 or 2 bench points. And there'd be points where they'd go 8-9 minutes without scoring. Got to figure that out. They didn't figure it out last year. They've had a whole offseason to figure it out. And, if they do, maybe they're a team that doesn't win the conference, but they're a team that easily gets a double bye. And again, experience in the Big Ten is nothing to ever take for granted.
Yeah, so the next team will be Northwestern at 37th in Bart Torvik. They finally do lose Chase Audige, but they bring back Bowie Berry and Barnheiser. They get Ryan Langborg from Princeton, Matthew Nicholson, their 7-footers, back too. Like I said earlier, Collins was gone, but somehow they found a way to make the tournament with a team that really hadn't made the tournament. So this year for me, really, it's all about is that their real team, or do they just kind of get hot last year? Because they got really hot for a stretch there where they were beating everybody. And actually, you'll get some actual Northwestern fans in that arena instead of, Big Ten transports to Chicago. But I'm really, really curious to see what we're going to get from Northwestern this year because they never really scored it at a crazy high rate last year, but they played defense, which is not really the case in many of Chris Collins's teams. But he's had 2 tournament appearances now. It's all about making that third this year and sustaining some kind of success.
Absolutely, Sean. And, this is probably on par with their 2017-18 year, the year after they made their first dance, like the Big Ten Network documentary. They brought back a lot of pieces from that tourney team, and that year was nothing short of a flop. It was straight up flop. We're from New Jersey. We'll tell it like it is. This is a year that's on par with that. It doesn't mean the story is written at all, but they have to sustain success. That's something historically at Northwestern that's never been done. And that's what they got to do to take the next step. I'm always assessing what the next step is. And I'm not saying anything revolutionary. They have to do it. And that doesn't mean Collins has to do it. I think he's decently safe as of now. I'm not going to worry about all the other stuff floating around their athletic department. But last year was definitely an A++ from him. And let's just see if he keeps it going. Maybe they become a main stable in the Big Ten, and hopefully for them, their sake, the NCAA tournament.
So the next team is Maryland, 1 spot behind Northwestern, 38th. So there seems to be a lot of Big Ten teams here in kind of the tournament, make the tournament range. This is the 7th Big Ten team, still in the top 40. We may not see any national championship contenders again, but we certainly will see a high number of tournament teams. So Maryland making the tournament in Kevin Willard's first year. Very, very good success for them. I would say, they didn't have the practice facility, a new coach and a new league to make the tournament is really kind of all that you can expect, but bring back Jameer Young, Donta Scott, Julian Reese. They get a couple freshmen in. They get Jordan Geronimo from Indiana. At this point, I think you probably just, you roll them out there and see what happens again because Maryland was a tough team to play last year at home. I think they may have only lost once at home.
They only lost once at home.
And that was to UCLA in December.
Yep.
So if you're able to win at home in college basketball, you're going to make the tournament and pick off maybe 2 road wins, 3, but they were horrible outside their home arena last year. Like they probably ended up being a pretty similar team this year, maybe not so drastically terrible on the road because they had some bad games on the road. And I know they had a tough part of their schedule and they had some of their tougher road games during that stretch, but they were 15 points worse away from home rather than like the typical 7 or 8 that we see from, the rest of the country. But say you fix your road form just a little bit and you're going to be just fine.
Yeah, just to add real quick, Sean, Wisconsin's problem is can we score? Maryland's problem is can we score on the road? We both know which one of those problems you'd rather have.
So the next team at 42, which I think is pretty high, Ohio State. They lose Bryce Sensabaugh to the NBA. They get Jamison Battle from Minnesota. Chris Holtmann has had a lot of compliments from us over the years, going back to his Butler days. But their team did not defend last year. They happened to score a couple times, but they were definitely the most disappointing team in the conference compared to their preseason expectations. You lose your scorer, but you may have been better when he was off the floor. Zed Key is back. He wasn't right last year. You get Jamison Battle, veteran in the conference. I'm leaning towards that you just can write off that bad year last year, but they haven't really changed the roster that much other than, the transfer of Battle. So a couple freshmen in the door that'll be, pieces off the bench. But I'm leaning towards the fact that last year was just a bad year and Chris Holtmann is on the elite level of coaching, and I think they'd make the tournament this year. But if they don't, then people are going to be calling for his job.
Yeah, one thing I'm gonna throw 2 things out there, Sean. The first is I'm in total agreement with that. And Chris Holtmann teams offensively, even last year at the end, people forget they did make it to Saturday of that Big Ten tournament all the way from Wednesday. which yours truly did call. Quick sidebar, but getting off that point, maybe that could be a preview or something they could work off. I know the vibe most of the season was very negative, but they did end the season for them on a positive note. That showed them the kind of team they can be. Um, Certainly, offense was not really the biggest issue of that team toward the end. It's going to be defense, and I really think another year for those guys is going to do wonders for them. Maybe not as talented as last year, but this Big Ten experience over talent. And the last thing, Sean, on that is Gene Smith, the Ohio State AD, longtime Ohio State AD, is stepping down at the end of this academic year. So I'll put it this way: Holtman not only has to impress the current administration, he doesn't want to be a problem for the next AD. And I'll tell you this: Ohio State football, maybe if Ryan Day loses again to Michigan, that's a whole other debate. But you don't want to make it as easy as we have another losing season where we didn't make the tournament at an athletic department like Ohio State. Definitely not.
And it's not that they were, not a great team last year. I think every coach, to an extent, has earned, one kind of strike, if you will. But they were horrendous last year, and they kind of out of nowhere too. It's not like you had turning over the roster, getting a new core in. No, they were supposed to be good, and they were probably the second worst team in the conference for most of the year. But if you whiff again, I think he goes, even though he probably doesn't deserve it. But I'm leaning towards that that's not going to happen. So the next team, 50th and Bart Torvik, is a team with kind of a sneaky, really good season for their program, is Nebraska. They returned Tominaga and Wiltshire, but they also get a couple of new players in. They get Juwan Gary's second year after coming over from Alabama, and Josiah Alec from New Mexico. 9-11 last year in the conference. There's teams that make the tournament with that record. Obviously, they had a little bit of a rough time in the non-conference, but it seems like the year for Nebraska to at least sort of be in the tournament conversation. I don't know if they need a tournament berth to save Fred Hoiberg's job, but they certainly can't go backwards from where they were last year. They were a 17-14 team, 9-11 in the conference. I think if they do that again, at least the conference part, I think Fred Hoiberg may have his first tournament appearance in Lincoln.
Yeah, Sean, and we were in total agreement most of last year that Fred deserved another year, and this is his year. I will disagree. I think Fred does have to make the tournament, and I think if they do what you say, which is not take a step back, and they do beat some of these cupcake non-conference opponents, and I think they will learn their lesson from last year. I think they could definitely get tourney appearance number one under Fred, and their first since 2014, that year with Tim Miles. Isn't that insane? So it's going to be 10 years now coming up. So, and again, as a fan base, very starved, don't have to bring up football again. So, Pinnacle Bank Arena, not a fun place to play. And I think it's going to be one of the tougher environments in the country this year. So, yeah, Sean, exciting prospects for Nebraska basketball. That's how I'd put it.
Well, maybe not exciting compared to the other teams, but this is kind of as good as it gets for Nebraska ball, at least in the last 10 years. So next team on the list, Joe, 55, is your Michigan Wolverines. A lot of turnover over there. Hunter's obviously in Kansas. A lot of question marks will be on head coach Juwan Howard. I think he's probably got the hottest seat in the conference. Is there a way that there's definitely a way that Michigan can make the tournament here, but is there really any way that you could do better than maybe an 8 or 9 seed?
I think Michigan is like the Iowa of college basketball in the Big Ten, and I'll tell you why. They lose a lot of great players, Kobe Buffkin and Hunter Dickinson. Jed Howard was a lottery pick, but a lot of people criticized him last year for his defensive play and sometimes even his effort. But again, that's last year. They do bring, this is a completely different formula than the past 2 years under Jawan. It's Namari Burnett comes in from Alabama. Trey Jackson probably going to be a bench guy, comes from Seton Hall. And probably their biggest addition is Olivier Kamwa, and yes, I said the name right, the Finnish forward from Tennessee, famously known for scoring 27 against Duke in that NCAA tournament game, Sean. There's a lot of pieces on this team, maybe more of an island of misfit toys kind of team, but perhaps a team that could be like Maryland, right, Sean?
Yeah,
Um,
Maryland didn't really have a star last year, and like Kamwa was kind of just another guy at Tennessee. He obviously was, playing really great at the end of the year, but I think it would be a really good step in the right direction if Michigan makes the tournament this year. Because you had the 11 seed. Well, obviously you made the Sweet 16, but you're very close to not making the tournament 2 years ago.
Absolutely.
And obviously, those 11 seeds, it just doesn't seem right. So many of those 11 seeds make it to the Sweet 16. Those are often kind of the big power teams that just get in. But and then last year playing in the NIT, I think, if you were to take even a step further back than in the NIT, I think Juwan goes, and you're looking at kind of a rebuild here with a whole new program, really.
Yeah,
So
Sean. One thing I'll add is like
yeah,
Indiana, very tough out of conference schedule, and that could be a good or bad thing. But last year the biggest thing that we'll keep this PG, that messed them up was the loss to Central Michigan, a quad four loss. No matter what day of the week it is, home, away, wherever it was, Siberia, that's a quad four loss. And this year they have at St. John's Monday night at the Garden. If you're not at that game with me, Sean, I'm going to be very angry. But, at St. John's, play in the Battle of Atlantis, and plays against Florida. So at Oregon, too. So a lot of high profile matchups for the Wolverines to kind of find their footing. And, maybe they pick off one or two of those games early. This could be a totally different conversation about what kind of team we're having. But, let's get into the next team.
yeah, there is no real downside to playing good teams. Like you could lose
Absolutely
by
not.
30 to a top 10 team, and that is still better than losing a quad four game. You can't lose a quad four game. You just can't. Quad three, okay, Minnesota at home, maybe even Minnesota away might be a quad three, but quad four losses, last year was kind of a little odd that kind of every team had a quad four loss, but usually that's a no. Like you're not in the tournament if you have a quad four loss. But just kind of gonna go through the rest of the teams quickly here. Rutgers is just behind. Can't really see a way that Rutgers has a tournament season. Their offense is projected to be 163 in Division One. That's almost half. They'll have a good defense. They'll probably win a couple games that they are against top teams at home. When the rack gets going, but they bring Amori back, but Hyatt Mag. They get Fernandez from UMass, but I don't see a way that Rutgers ends up in the tournament this year. Minnesota, as I previously mentioned, they're at 131. Ben Johnson, year 3. Not really sure where he goes from here. He loses one of his best players in Jamison Battle in the conference. And you look at their roster, Joe, I don't recognize anyone other than Dawson Garcia, who had a up and down year last year. I think Minnesota could be the doormats of the conference. And somehow in last place on here is Penn State, brand new team. Kind of was America's team there in the Big Ten tournament. Came within a shot of winning the conference tournament, and then was very close to knocking off the 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. So I really liked the way that Micah Shrewsbury's team plays, but the problem is that he's now the coach of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. So a lot of changes here. Rhodes brings in a couple guys from VCU, but I would almost just not even count what happens in State College on the basketball court this year. It's a new coach in a new conference with almost no players who've played in this conference before. They do get Puff Johnson from UNC, Qudus Wahab from Georgetown and Maryland, Ace Baldwin from VCU, but they're going to struggle to win games this year. And you just don't really, when you're looking at the long-term picture of Penn State basketball here, you had such a great year last year, and then you lose your coach in year 2. I think you're probably looking at 1, maybe 2 years of a lot of L's for Penn State. But that's kind of it for us here on the first episode of In a Nutshell. This was definitely a longer one. Each individual team, or each individual program rather, we'll go over some of the major sports, will be much shorter, probably in the 10 to 15 to 20-minute range. But that's all we have for you today. These are pre-recorded, so if some huge news does come out in the next couple days, we didn't happen yet for us. So, Joe, anything else to say before we sign off?
No, obviously a longer one. So thank you for staying on, and we're gonna start. This is episode 1, so start sending in your questions, and like the basketball one, we'll answer them right at the end. But thanks for listening, guys.
All right, we'll see you next time here on the In a Nutshell podcast. Thanks for listening.